When you think of terrifying weapons, you probably picture things like atom bombs or fighter jets. But there's one weapon that lurks unseen beneath the waves, constantly getting more advanced, always evolving and ready to strike with very little warning. It's no secret that submarines are scary. Since their invention in the 19th century, they've been the bane of navies everywhere. And since World War II, they've become even deadlier thanks to nuclear propulsion. Today, the best submarines are all but invisible, able to evade detection by modern sonar systems and strike at the heart of their enemy's naval power. These underwater vessels can be tricky to track, but it turns out they make for great spy bases too. But what if we told you that submarines might soon be able to operate without any people on board at all? What would the world's most powerful submarine look like if it had no crew? Keep watching to find out. Brief history. Since World War II. We've come a long way from the days when submarines were powered by noisy steam engines and had to surface every few hours to take in air. Today's nuclear submarines can stay submerged for months at a time and travel at speeds of over 30 knots. They're so quiet that they're almost impossible to detect. In fact, they're so stealthy that sometimes their crews can go for weeks without knowing they're being followed. Nuclear submarines have revolutionized naval warfare. For example, they allowed the United States to maintain a strong naval presence around the world without having to build costly shore-based support facilities. This is because nuclear subs don't need to surface regularly to refuel like diesel-powered boats do. Another major advantage is that nuclear submarines can dive much deeper than conventional subs, making them harder to detect and track. In fact, many nuclear submarines can dive to depths of more than 4,000 feet, where the pressure is more than 200 times that of the surface of the ocean. At these depths, they're essentially undetectable by traditional sonar systems. Nuclear versus conventional submarines. If you've ever played the game Battleship, you know that there are two main types of submarines, nuclear and conventional. Conventional submarines are powered by diesel engines and must surface to recharge their batteries. They're cheaper and easier to build than nuclear subs, but they're also much slower and shorter range. Nuclear submarines, on the other hand, are much more expensive, but they're also much faster and more versatile. They can stay submerged for months at a time and travel at speeds of over 30 knots. And because they don't have to surface to recharge their batteries, they can sneak up on their prey undetected. But which type of submarine is better? That depends on what you're using them for. If you need a cheap short-range boat for coastal defense, then a conventional submarine will do the job. But if you need a fast, long-range boat for open ocean warfare, then you'll want to go with a nuclear sub. Stealth technology. One of the biggest advances in submarine technology in recent years has been the development of new stealth coatings. These coatings help to reduce the noise produced by the submarine as it moves through the water. They also make the vessel less visible to sonar, which makes it much harder for enemy ships to detect and track them. To be fair, it's not like a submarine can exactly hide from view. After all, it's still submerged in water, which does block some of the sound waves used by sonar systems. But the stealth coatings applied to today's most advanced submarines make them extremely difficult to detect. In fact, some submarines have been designed with special anechoic tiles that absorb sound waves instead of reflecting them back, which makes them virtually invisible to sonar. Passive sonar. Another reason why nuclear submarines are so deadly is because they produce very little noise of their own. This means that they can use passive sonar to listen in on enemy communications and track their movements without being detected. Passive sonar works by listening to the sounds produced by other vessels. For example, the propellers of a ship produce a distinctive hum that can be picked up by a submarine's sonar. By listening to this sound, a submarine can estimate the speed and direction of the vessel. It can also use the sound to track the vessel over long distances. In fact, passive sonar has been used to track aircraft carriers and other large vessels across the oceans. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles, the ultimate weapon. One of the most feared weapons in the world is also one of the least understood. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles, or SLBMs for short, are missiles that are launched from submarines. As the name suggests, they are designed to carry nuclear warheads, and they're some of the most destructive weapons ever created. SLBMs are typically launched in response to a nuclear attack from another country. When a submarine launches an SLBM, it's usually done in a pre-programmed mode. This means that the missile doesn't require a human operator to guide it toward its target. Once the missile is launched, it follows a predetermined course until it reaches its target and detonates. SLBMs are incredibly accurate. In fact, they're so accurate that they can hit targets within just a few feet of their intended destination. This accuracy is what makes them so dangerous. If a country were to launch a nuclear attack against another country, it would likely do so using SLBMs. That's because submarines are able to remain hidden until it's too late to defend against an attack. Once an SLBM is launched, it can travel for thousands of miles before detonating. This means that a country could launch a surprise attack from virtually anywhere on the planet. There's really no defense against SLBMs except for mutually assured destruction. That's because if one country launches an SLBM, it's likely that the other country will do the same thing. This means that both countries will be destroyed if there's a full-scale nuclear war. That's why countries with nuclear weapons are so careful about how they use them. They know that one wrong move could trigger a global catastrophe. The future autonomous underwater drone. There's a good chance that the future of submarines lies in unmanned vessels. Unmanned submarines, or UUVs for short, offer a number of advantages over their manned counterparts. For example, they can be deployed in much greater numbers, since they don't have to worry about bringing the crew back to the surface. In addition, UUVs are much cheaper to operate since they don't require a crew of sailors to operate them. One of the most exciting potential uses for unmanned submarines is in the realm of intelligence gathering. Imagine a fleet of tiny submarines that can sneak into enemy waters and gather intel without being detected. They could listen in on enemy communications, track the movement of enemy ships, and even take photos or videos of enemy installations. These submarines could be equipped with a variety of sensors to collect different types of data. Some could be equipped with acoustic sensors to listen in on enemy communications. Others could have cameras to take photos or videos of enemy installations. Still, others could be equipped with chemical sensors to detect the presence of certain chemicals that might indicate the presence of a chemical weapon. Of course, there are also the obvious military applications for unmanned submarines. They could be used to lay mines, attack enemy ships, or even conduct surveillance. But the potential for these vessels goes far beyond what we can imagine. For example, they could be used to explore shipwrecks or search for underwater objects. They could also be used to collect data about the ocean itself, such as temperature, salinity, and depth. The possibilities are really endless. One day, unmanned submarines may be just as common as drones in the sky. Who knows? Maybe you'll have your own personal sub someday. Which country do you think has the most fearsome fleet beneath the waves? Comment below and subscribe for more epic tales of the underwater realm.